Hi, everyone. My name is Kurt Bachman. Welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. Today, I'm speaking with Chef Iliana Regan, a self-taught Michelin-starred chef and prior owner of Elizabeth Restaurant. In 2020, she turned Elizabeth over to her employees to run her latest venture with her wife, Anna, called Milkweed Inn Bed and Breakfast, a 150-acre property set deep in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Back in 2019, Chef Regan's debut memoir, Burn the Place, was longlisted for the National Book Award, the very first time a food writer was listed since Julia Child won 40 years ago. She recently published her second memoir, Fieldwork, highlighting her years spent foraging and living in the woods. In addition to working as the chef and owner of Milkweed Inn, she recently earned a Master's of Fine Arts in Writing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Chef Regan has received national recognition for her culinary arts endeavors, profiled and reviewed by The New Yorker, Lucky Peach, The New York Times, and Chicago Magazine named her pierogi the best in the city. She was also named 40 under 40 in Crain's Chicago Business. David Chang called her one of the best chefs he has ever known. Join me today as we speak with Chef Regan about finding her identity as a chef, her deep connection to the great outdoors, and becoming a pioneer of new gatherer cuisine. And there she is. Good morning, Chef. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm good. Thank you.
I'm a little exhausted after the introduction. There is a lot there. So a big congratulations first and a big thank you. We are so appreciative of your time. So I think it's important. How are you? How's the weather? Heard a puppy in the background. How's the
We,
weather in May?
yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? It has occasionally when we've come out here, it has snowed, and especially before we leave, because we leave in the fall. So, we might get that October snowfall, but this is the most I've seen this late in the season. I have never seen it snowing in May before. So, I think actually I saw on the weather channel for the UP that this is his historic event. It's the most snowfall they've had, this late. So yeah. Anyways, but it's been a pretty snowy winter up here. But once the snow starts to come down in the fall, like really come down, we have to be gone because we're 11 and a half miles down a logging road and there's no plows, no anything. So if we're not out, then we're hiking.
You're there or you're hiking, yeah, or a helicopter comes in. How does the weather, when I live in Boulder, Colorado, we too have had a very extended spring with snow as recently as last weekend. My 12-year-olds had several baseball games canceled already. Does it impact what you're thinking about for the menu, like spring ramps? Does that throw all of that off?
Right. Yeah, I think it will certainly delay things. I just drove in a few days ago, my first time back here since last season, and I was checking out my spots, just as I was driving nice and slow, and the ramps are coming up. They're still pretty small because so I'm used to foraging in the Midwest around, the basin, the bottom of the Great Lakes, the bottom of Lake Michigan, right? Like Northwest Indiana, Northeast Indiana, Illinois area. And up here, we're about 3 weeks to 4 weeks behind. So, the ramps were ready a while ago there, and now they're just coming up here. So how this affects them, though, I want to say that the ground is still warm enough that I don't think they'll completely freeze. Maybe the tips of them, but they're pretty hardy. So we'll see. But it's certainly going to delay some of like the fiddlehead ferns
Oh,
and
yeah.
the dandelion, the stinging nettles. It's definitely gonna delay a lot of the other greens and the morels and things like that. But the nice thing is that this is all gonna melt, and they had a lot of snow this winter, so we know that our wells are full and our rivers are full, maybe some of them too full, but at least the ground has plenty of moisture for the summer.
No, that's great. That's the optimistic side of it all. I was just this past weekend in the Huron, Ohio area. I was at the Chef's Garden, and
Oh, yeah,
they're just a few miles off the lake there. And it was ramp weekend. The ramps were
right.
everywhere, and they they didn't even have time to package them. They were just bringing them in crates, and people were grabbing them. So,
Yeah.
and the aroma of that was just spectacular
Yeah,
everywhere.
I've never been to Chef's Garden, but seem like nice people over there. And I have definitely used their products before when I was at Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, they are wonderful. Hey, Chef Kirk here. Just wanted to take a quick break from the show to chat about you. If you're curious about culinary school and the types of careers it could open up for you, our team at Escoffier created a tool that might help. Just head to escoffier.edu/tool. That's escoffier.edu/TOOL. You can get access to a downloadable career interest survey and answer a few questions to see if you might be geared towards the culinary arts, pastry arts, hospitality, or restaurant operations. Get more clarity on the right culinary path for you. Head to escoffier.edu/tool to take this easy assessment. Now back to the show. You know, I saw on Instagram, coming back to the pierogies, I saw something that talked about pierogi art of some sort. It almost looked, the photos almost look too delicate, almost too beautiful to eat.
Oh, on
'Cause
my Instagram?
yeah, yeah.
So
So
I,
somebody's putting it on your Instagram.
yeah, I've been making them for so long. You know, back in the day when I started at farmers markets and things, that's what I was making because that's what was selling, and I was building a name for myself. And I would make about 100 dozen a week, you
Oh,
know,
wow.
is a lot of pierogi.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, it's a task that I can do rather quickly, but I dread doing.
Yeah.
You know, like sometimes I only have to make like 20 and I'm just like dragging my feet. But so lately I've just been doing some things to, I don't know, make them look more beautiful. So I've been embossing them with flower petals or, you know, dried herbs and things like that. Just trying to change it up a little bit for myself. So, but yeah, they definitely look very pretty. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, they're getting attention. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So, you know, let's get into your story. It's intriguing. It's somewhat unconventional. I read, and you mentioned in an interview that these are your words. All my sisters are really good cooks. My mom's a really good cook. My dad's a really good cook. Even if I tried not to do this, it might still have been the outcome. It was going to happen no matter what. So in many ways, it sounds like becoming a chef, becoming a great cook, a forager was predetermined, predestined in a way, and it just kind of runs in the DNA.
Mhm.
Similar for me, I grew up in a, you know, more on the pastry side, with several generations. I fought it. I fought it for years, but if it's in
Mhm.
the in the DNA, it's in the DNA. Would you say that's the case with you?
Yeah, I absolutely, and I think I was exploring that a lot in my book Fieldwork because that book isn't just about, you know, foraging. It's more like foraging than being about foraging, I would say. And it there I would as I was writing it, I was thinking a lot about visually, symbolically, DNA and family trees and the actual trees in the forest and how the forest functions and how family functions and how, you know, there's a lot of interconnectedness obviously below the ground with mycelium, but also a lot of interconnectedness with our passions and traumas in family. So I think that that was something that I was discovering more and more as I wrote more and more, because not only did my parents have a restaurant in Gary, Indiana from 1975 to 1980, prior to them having that, my grandmother owned that restaurant space in that my parents eventually took over. And my grandmother, she was from Poland, and she actually had a little inn in Poland. So yeah, the cooking and the restaurant tour aspect of my family stretches way back. And and my parents, I don't know, it wasn't like they were trying to be chefs or become chefs, but it's interesting because I've been exploring a lot lately for a new book I'm writing, which is a narrative cookbook, but it's all about the recipes that happened at their restaurant called Jenny's Cafe in Gary. So it's a little bit history in there, and the every my I come from a family of steel workers, and they, even though steelworking was their main job, they all had side hustles. And for my dad, being the bookkeeper and the manager of Jenny's Cafe was, I guess, his side hustle, and my mom was the chef. And I feel like yeah, a lot of that definitely just, I don't know. It was almost like, I think I talk about this in Burn the Place, like it's osmosis, like my mom was
Yeah.
pregnant with me when they had the restaurant, and she was working in the kitchen, and yeah, somehow that just got embedded in me, because once I started working in restaurants, I never really left. I've tried to leave it, but I, get pulled back in. So
No, I love that story. And sure, your mom was about to have you. You heard and you felt and you
mhm,
experienced just like she did. I've read that your talent, your culinary talent is, and I think this is so interesting, it's based on instinct and memory, to your point, and almost otherworldly connection to ingredients, to the food. And this is a great message for students. It's one of the hardest skills to teach, this connection and curiosity
mhm,
around ingredients, the ability to even create a narrative,
mhm.
explain that cognitive critical thinking piece around ingredients. Can you describe in your words a little bit more how you connect with ingredients?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that there is like a little aspect of it that is, I guess in a way of otherworldly, without sounding too like woo woo about it or whatever. I love being in nature. I was out in nature a lot when I was young, because I grew up on a 10-acre farm, and so my dad was always having the garden, and my mom was always cooking the things from the garden, and we always had, maybe an animal that my dad was going to butcher or something. So I was definitely around having things in season. We would go out foraging on my grandfather's farm, so I was out in nature that way. I would pick mulberries with my mom, or hazelnuts, or crab apples. Um, so there, I have that inspiration from being very, very young. And my sisters had it too, but they didn't necessarily follow that path. And I also think, though, for, students and also chefs and people who are interested in cooking and the culinary world, not everybody has that history or maybe connection, because I know that there's lots of people I've met over the years who said, yeah, I grew up with my family who wasn't good cooks, but that doesn't mean that you have to have some sort of deep history with food to have a connection with it. I think that that's a thing for students to be able to look at and think, well, okay, how do I start building my connection with food, and what is it that inspires me about it, and how can I actually, maybe if I go on to have a family someday, how do I create my own new tradition and passions and connection with food in a way that I can pass it on, or even just be able to cook for others and say, have some artistic expression through it, because food tells a story.
Yeah, it does. I love that word expression. I love this conversation, and it can be an entire podcast. And it's probably the quirky me, but this idea of connections and memories. I think about the movie Ratatouille, and when the critic was so tough, right, on that kitchen full of rats, right? But he had that one dish, and it took him immediately back. I thought they did a wonderful job of depicting that. I'm just really curious to stay on that topic just for another moment. Earlier, you talked about, the ramps and the fiddleheads and the morels and, what's happening currently. Are there times when you are in the kitchen, or even when you had Elizabeth, and you immediately were able to go back because something that happened, or just some instinct of how you reacted to a particular ingredient took you right back to that 10-acre farm? I guess I'm sort of asking, Chef, are those influences from way back then still with you today, and how you treat an ingredient or react to an ingredient?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's lots of times that happened, and a lot of times it has been connected to like smell memory. Um, Chanterelles for one, and that is actually something I talk about in one of my books. But sometimes if I'm making like sausage, particularly blood sausage, so usually, yeah, it is connected to olfactory. But I will say that that like certain wild mushrooms, like if I get find a hen of the woods, which we also call sheep's head, sometimes they're called maitake, it just depends. But those I really always just treat so simply, just like my mom did, so I can almost always guarantee that I'm just going to coat them with a little bit of cornstarch, dip them in egg, and then just all-purpose flour that has a little bit of salt and pepper in it, maybe a touch of paprika, and then shallow fry them in a cast iron with butter. And that is, I remember being, whenever my dad and I hunted for sheep's head, we would bring them back, and my mom would clean them up, and she would just immediately do that, like right in the skillet, and we would just eat them right then and there. So there's a lot of times, or I would say most of the time, that when I'm cooking, I'm treating stuff in a way that is first and foremost about it being delicious and actually pretty simple. I think the way that it ends up falling in a tasting menu, and also being seeming a little bit more like on the high end or modern, is just, that's all aesthetics, that's the plating and where it falls in line, and kind of creating like this little narrative arc of like flavors and textures, and the building up and things like that. But most of the time I would say that I'm using unique ingredients, but really treating them in the way that just like highlights what they are. And I think a lot of that I take from what my mom used to do with ingredients.
I love that, and such an appropriate story for the ultimate dish. Going back to memories and sharing. Let's fast forward just a little bit. And you started working in some really significant and celebrated Chicago restaurants as you were growing up, and foraging and being on the farm, and food was just kind of part of your life, again, your DNA. Was it always part of your dream to work at a high level? And what was that journey like, getting to that level of gosh, prestige, sophistication, notoriety.
Yeah. So when I started working in restaurants, like especially when I was 15 and started working in restaurants, even through my you know, to the time I was 21, I didn't even know such things existed as like restaurants with tasting menus and wine pairings and all that kind of stuff. Like I had been to some casual fine dining restaurants and to some nice places, but nothing like Charlie Trotter's. Like even though I had lived in Chicago by the time I was by the time I got the job at Trio in Evanston where Grant Achatz was working, I had been in Chicago already 3 years, and I don't even think I knew what Charlie Trotter's was or had heard of it really, except in one of the casual fine dining places I worked at. One of my friends one day started to sort of talk about it, and then I saw that there was an ad out for a host at the restaurant Trio, which I knew was kind of that caliber of the Charlie Trotters. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go check that out. And so I did, and I it was my first time I staged in the for the front of the house position. It was the first time I had ever seen food like that or saw a service like that. It was the first time I had ever seen anything of the sort, and was really inspired. And so I took that job, and then just one thing led to another. I mean, I learned so much. I worked at Trio for a while, and then eventually went with Grant to Alinea, and that kind of started the whole thing. So I think that that was a huge impact on my career, not only on in my writing career, but also in just my food career. Like that passion and creativity that those restaurants expressed was just, I was very impressionable, and so that really stuck with me.
What an incredible time that was in the city of Chicago with Charlie. And I almost forgot until I started doing a little bit of research that you worked with Michael Carlson for a bit over at Schwa as well. And
Yeah, I staged there. So when I worked at Trio, that's when I met Michael. He was working in the garde manger um, section of the kitchen, and we were friends. And then he eventually went on to do, when Grant decided he was going to do Alinea and left Trio, Michael was offered, I want to say like a CDC position or something at Alinea, but he passed it up because he really wanted to open his own place. And I think that really opened a door for a lot of chefs. And I'm sure that there were small fine dining boutique restaurants before that, but at least in Chicago, he was the first time I saw anybody open a restaurant that was fairly low budget, really small, that could be 100% chef driven. So I want to say, like, I remember him saying something like he opened it with $80,000. So that was a huge inspiration to me, because most people like think, okay, if you're going to open a fine dining restaurant, you need, millions of dollars. And lots of people do. But that was a really cool aspect to think like, wow, like I could really do this. And I think a lot of chefs saw that and thought, wow, I could really do this, and I could do it nearly on my own. Um, and but yeah, so schwa was just such a hit back in the day, and I mean it's still very popular, and it's like a chef's chef type of place,
yeah, yeah,
uh,
well said. For
yeah,
sure. Well,
but
let's talk about Elizabeth. Let's talk about the launch of Elizabeth, your wildly successful restaurant in Lincoln Square, classic
mhm,
location in Chicago. Chicago's very near and dear to me. My parents came over from Germany in the 60s, and we had a bakery on Irving and Austin, for several years in the 70s. So, I always come back to Chicago. My kids were born there. And what for you, chef, what was the inspiration behind Elizabeth? And did you expect to earn a Michelin star? Did you even think about Michelin stars within your second year of operation? It's
I
incredible.
have thought about it, but I didn't have really too many expectations around it. I had some hope, but no expectations, because I really didn't know what necessarily it took to get one. But yeah, I like I said, I was very inspired by the fact that I could probably do this little boutique place. So I had launched a little underground supper club in my home, and I was cooking for people because even though I had built a name for myself at farmers market selling the pierogies, I didn't want a Polish restaurant or a pierogi business. So I started doing 10, 15, 20 courses in my home on the weekends for 10 guests at a time. And that's where I found a few investors. And I think we had $125,000. We found a little storefront in a little strip right in Lincoln Square. It had already been a restaurant, and so it had the liquor license. So it was like a turnkey. So we knew all we were going to have to do was essentially remodel, because if you do a restaurant build out, you're looking at a lot of money. But in this case, we just had to remodel, and I wanted it to feel like home and cozy, because that's what I had been doing was cooking out of my house. And obviously when I started becoming a chef in the kitchen full time, because I had been back of the house, front of the house, back of the house, front of the house over the years, just depending on what I was doing with school and things like that. So but when I started to create menus in the way that were long form, like tasting menu format, I really went back to my roots, like we were talking about, like incorporating foraged things and preserved things and making sure it's very seasonal and all that. So that was a big part of it. And so we did the best we could with this little tiny storefront. And as for Michelin, I think the first year we opened in September of 2012, and the Michelin guide came out in November of 2012 for the following year. So we weren't, we were too new to be able to have been in it. But then that following year, we had started to get some questions through emails from Michelin, which seemed a little bit suspicious, but I was like, starting to cross my fingers. And maybe like a month before the announcements came, I got an email that said, "Oh, we're updating our files, and we would like to know the chef's phone number." Which I knew that the day that Michelin comes out, they always call you in the morning. So that was also hopeful. But I thought when it started to get, and then I got invited to the Michelin party, and I thought, okay, well, if we don't get a Michelin star, this all will be a dirty trick by them for having asked me all these questions and things. But yeah, so that morning I was in my car driving to work, and I saw the unknown caller come up on my ID, which typically I wouldn't answer, but I answered it, and it was them, and we got a Michelin star. And that was pretty incredible. The whole staff was really excited because most of them had still already been there from the beginning. So for that, year and couple months that we had been open, that was just like, very very, I don't know, affirmational, I guess, that all this hard work we had been doing, showed up in that sort of accolade. So yeah, that was really huge. And then we, of course, I went through our period of like, well, can we get two, and really striving for that. But I just think that we never got to the two, and I'm not gonna beat my head about it nowadays like I used to be thinking about it, but I still think one is pretty awesome achievement, and to have it consecutively every year from when we were open is really nice.
It's spectacular, and it's such a nice story. I have chills just listening, and I love how you bring the team into it as you shared that
Mhm.
incredible accolade with the team. It's really, really special. And speaking of the team, back in 2020, you decided to transfer ownership of Elizabeth to the team, and you launched Milkweed, which was about 300 miles away. And I read a quote where you said, "I came out here to the woods because I always wanted to do something that felt a little bit more sustainable. It just made sense to be cooking for 10 people a week rather than 150." So first of all, brilliant. I love that. I think, again, like I said at the beginning, it's every chef's dream,
Mhm.
to be able to do something like that. How difficult of a decision was that, to go forward and leave Elizabeth, to the team, and go to a remote location? Or
Yeah,
was
it
it
wasn't.
exciting?
Yeah, it was definitely not a difficult decision at all, because I want to say about 4 years into having Elizabeth, I really, it was a small business. Not only was I the chef and the front of the house manager, but also the bookkeeper. I did the sales tax, reconciled the bank accounts, wrote the paychecks. I did all the things. And so I very quickly got burnt out. But I think the thing that I never expected was going to be as hard as it was is just like managing people and being the overall manager of everything took its toll on me. So I want to say by like after having a couple other ventures, I had a little bakery for a while. I had Kitsune, which was like a Japanese inspired restaurant, um, and trying to even manage more, but not having the funding to be able to like create teams around management. Um, and then also trying to control quality and being at two places at once. I thought, scaling up is not for me. And so it solidified for me that I need to figure out what my next thing is and make sure that it's something that is smaller, that I can largely run by myself, has little management, but also is more conscious about natural resources and other things, because that was something that always weighed on me. Um, so I had already had this kind of going in my mind that this was the thing I was going to do. So in 2019 was when we opened for the first season, and that was prior to the pandemic, and Elizabeth was still open, and I had a guest resident chef, Jenner Tomaska, who has Esme restaurant in Chicago. He didn't have Esme yet, and so he worked there for that like 6 weeks at Elizabeth while I was up here for our first season. We just had a short season, but um, when I got back, I was kind of already thinking about it, like, what am I going to do next? Because I'm going to go back there next season, and if I don't have my team ready for me to be able to leave for 6 months, how am I going to do this? And then once all that we got back, and there was like, the typical just management drama. I went to my kind of my guy who was my ride or die, who worked in the office and was actually at the time, I had taught him how to do a lot of the bookkeeping and payroll and things like that. And he had been in restaurants for a long time. We worked together at Trio actually, and I just said, hey, I don't think I want this place anymore. Would you like to have it? And I said, literally, like, you can give me $1 for it. That's how ready I am to get out. But I was like, it's not worth it to sell it, because he had gone through my Kitsune sale with me. I said, we probably won't cover the cost of the bills we currently owe, like in all the paperwork that has to go with it. I said, you can just have it, or I'm going to wait for the lease to run out and then close it down and, maybe put up a sale for people to come in and buy the equipment. And so, yeah, so he took it and we completed the paperwork. I think, well, then the pandemic happened and I said, do you still want it? And he said, yeah. And so I think in July of 2020, we made the official transfer. And then we waited about a year till he reopened, till we, made the announcement. But either way, yeah, I was gone by July of 2020 and I never looked back. And he's recently changed the name and kind of remodeled the inside and has made it his own, which I think is a really good job because I think that people, even though most people knew I was gone, a lot of people didn't. They still thought it was a restaurant. So it's completely his own now, and he's got a great chef from Connecticut who has become a finalist in the James Beard. His name's Christian Hunter, and yeah, and I'm really proud of them. And I did a residency there over the winter, where for a couple weeks I created a menu, and this was right before the new chef started. And even going in there and working in my old restaurant, there's not a part of me that's like, oh, I wish this was still mine. Like not even the slightest. That's how ready I was to be done with that chapter.
No, I love that. And it's a great lesson. When it comes to milkweed, it says on the website, hang out completely off the grid, glamp, stargaze, eat, drink, relax, fly, fish, kayak, hike, and dream for yourselves. I mean, so exciting. I've been all over the website, and my son and I both have been actually. What can you walk us through what a guest experience is like at Milkweed? What's it like to work with Anna every day together to realize this dream?
Well, I mean, I think considering the fact that we're together 24/7 and mostly working, especially when we're here, like we do a pretty good job. But I mean, it's definitely not easy working with your partner. And I have to we have to try to be mindful of ourselves and of each other, because it's very easy to get in some ruts and get frustrated and annoyed. But I don't know. We do it every once in a while. We have to like take a step back and have our little powwows and be like, hey, I'm sorry for this or that. I was frustrated or whatever. And then we have our moments too where we shine, and I think that's particularly when guests are here, because I'm a little bit more introverted and she's extroverted, and I have to be so busy cooking that she gets to really make a nice guest experience. And she's really welcoming and is a chatterbox, and people really enjoy being with her. So it works out really well. But for the guests come on Friday evenings. We meet them at a pickup spot because it's not an easy place to get to. So we have a pickup spot. They follow us back or they drive with us depending on their vehicle. When they get here, we do a little orientation, and then I cook I don't know, like 7 or 8 courses, but it's family style, a little more casual, but I do it all over the open fire. And then they go outside afterwards around the fire, where we do a bonfire with s'mores and digestifs. And then that's usually where Anna entertains. And then I am still preparing stuff for the following morning for breakfast. And then we, the next morning they wake up, they have pastries ready for them. So kind of grab and go. And then I make, a second breakfast around 11 p.m. that's a little bit more savory. Then around 1:30 or 2, I do lunch, which is about 2 courses, usually a salad and something hearty like a pasta. Sometimes I'll do a little dessert with it. It just depends. And then about 5:30, we have a like cheese, charcuterie, and pickle board, and Anna does cocktails. And then about 7:30 or 8 is when we have our main dinner, which is anywhere from 10 to 15 courses and has the wine pairings and everything. And then Sunday morning at 11, we have brunch, and then we take people back out. But on Saturday, most people hike. A lot of people sit around and read, and just sit on our deck because there's a really beautiful view of the forest. We have an ATV that people can drive around and explore. Sometimes they forage. There's archery and some yard games. We do have fly fishing equipment, but it's not, there's lots of trees down in our river, so it's not great for fishing. So people have caught some little fish here and there, because you can also, reel fish as well, but it's not the best for it, but it can be done. And yeah, there's a lot for people to do in between meals, and also just kind of like be out in nature and connect. And we do get people come who are local, but we also get people from really really far away. I mean, we've had people from San Diego, from LA, from Portland, Oregon. We've had people from New York, all down the East Coast, Florida, Oklahoma. So we've had people come from everywhere. Canada. So it's pretty amazing, though. I would say the majority of our weekends, at least maybe, a couple here or there is from Chicago, and then lots of Michiganders, lots of people from Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, Kalamazoo, Traverse City, because I feel like a lot of Michigan people definitely feel like their immediate connection to the UP. So it's really opened us up to a lot more people, because I will say that when I was in Chicago at Elizabeth, there wasn't a whole lot of people coming from Michigan to visit us, even though we were a lot closer, but now there's a lot of people that come up, to us all the way from lower Michigan. So that's really nice. But yeah, so it's, I think people, I mean, most people say that it exceeds their expectations, which is really nice to hear.
It's
It
the
is a
ultimate compliment. That's
yeah,
lovely. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You know what it feels like? I was getting chills listening. Growing up, maybe it was my parents, European style, but it feels like company coming over for the weekend. When guests or family came over, they called it company. Company's coming over. I know it's a ton of work, but it feels like company's coming over, and
yeah,
they can just
great.
relax. Yeah.
Yeah, and people, they're staying the night. Like, we're waking up in the mornings and they're here. And so
Yeah.
we've actually made a lot of friends by doing this. What we have had over the years at Elizabeth, and aside from just being a chef in the restaurant, I've also taught classes and had foraging trips. So I've had all sorts of ways to connect with my guests rather than just serving them food. But this is a whole nother level of that. And so we've really made some nice connections with people
I,
because of
lo-
this.
I love it. I love it. Well, Chef, we can't leave today. A couple more things. Without talking a little bit about your memoir, Burn the Place. I've read a lot, have the book chronicling. It's your life. It's including your struggles to find a sense of belonging as a chef. It's described in my reading as quote unquote raw, like that first bite of a wild onion, alive with startling imagery and told with uncommon emotional power. Um, I read this morning, Publishers Weekly called it, I think this is beautiful, a blistering yet tender memoir that chronicles one chef's journey from foraging on her family's farm to running her own Michelin-starred restaurant and finding her place in the world. I would think that that deserves a high five. It's absolutely beautiful. Would you agree in that description?
Yeah, it's incredible. And as I was writing it, I was just going for it and, keeping it like, all right, right, things that I learned when I was an undergraduate for writing, well, write how you talk, write about what you know, like, using some tricks here and there to string the stories together. I read a lot, so like that's another way that I've informed myself as a writer. So I was certainly thinking about the craft of it, but mostly I was just, telling my story and trying to tell it in a way that's entertaining, just like when I'm cooking food, I'm trying to do it in a way that's going to be nice for people visually, but also thinking about how I'm crafting it. And then ultimately wanting to make it really delicious. So I was approaching the book in the same way, but when I put it out there to the world, I didn't have any expectations of what was going to happen to it next. I thought, okay, maybe, some people who know me are going to read it, and people who know about Elizabeth and stuff, but I didn't think it would get a lot of the awards or the attention that it did. So I was really just I don't know. I surprised myself. It did make it a little bit more difficult to write the second book, because just like getting, Michelin stars or James Beard's awards, then you have now this expectation of yourself that you have to meet, and then you put the pressure on. So I was felt that, the first book I just wrote with abandon, not thinking about anything, and then the second book, as I'm writing it, it doesn't matter. Like the thoughts still crept into my head, even if I tried to push it out. Like, well, how are you going to make sure that this lives up to that? And so whether it does or not, I can't be the I don't have any control over that, but I did my best. But yeah, it was it that book, I guess, exceeded my own expectations.
Now that's wonderfully said and um, magical in many ways. There'll be a lot of students that listen to our chat and they'll be incredibly inspired and motivated. Um, and some might even want to follow your path, right? And that's not to downplay that. There's so
Mhm.
much behind the scenes that people don't know. But would you have any words of advice for someone who would want to end up in a similar place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that anybody can wait for the inspiration or motivation. A big part of what I do on a daily basis is discipline. Even though it sounds like it's all inspiring, I mean, I'm exactly in the place that I've dreamed about being. But, those were dreams I had when I was in my 20s and 30s, and now I'm in my 40s, and it's a lot of hard work. And a lot of times it's waking up and, yeah, there's a whole bounty of things outside that there are to forage, but sometimes I'm like, okay, I gotta, pick ticks off my body when I get back. And, it's not it. Then there's a whole bunch of processing you have to do and cleaning things. Like it doesn't, being a chef, doing what I do, at any point of it, even having your own restaurant, there's a lot of unglamorous parts to it. And so that's where a lot of discipline comes in, and this is a hard industry and a hard job. And sticking it out to make it to have your own place or become an executive chef is, there's a lot of drive and focus and discipline that is required. But I think you can do those things, and do them in a way that is like healthy mentally and physically, and it doesn't have to be in environments that have a negative culture or, abusive culture. So, I mean, and bottom line is this is not brain surgery. We're in essentially the entertainment industry, and this is a industry where we should be having fun and learning and growing and um, just appreciating what we're doing and not banging our heads against the wall over perfection. So I think that that's something to be mindful of.
Really, really good advice. I love the concept of discipline. Very, very well said, Chef. Chef, the name of the podcast is The Ultimate Dish. So my final question in your mind can be a memory or 10 courses. What is the ultimate dish?
All right. So I think the thing that I think is probably the ultimate dish, like, okay, if this was gonna be my last meal, I would like to eat charred octopus with potatoes with like lots of lemon and onion and peppers and olive oil.
I absolutely, and you're going to laugh. I swear I'm not making this up. I was at a Greek restaurant of all places in Ohio when I was with my friends at the Chef's Garden, and we had charred octopus with beautiful, beautiful German butter potatoes from the farm, and lemon and herbs, and it was spectacular. It was so simple. It was so simple.
Yeah. Yeah,
I,
that's my favorite. That's a very, like Spanish, Mediterranean, Greek, Italian type of thing. You see it a lot on all those different menus.
yeah, yeah, really, really well done. I love it. I love it. And thank you for your time. We've gone a little over. I know you're incredibly busy, but
Oh,
best of luck always. Such a beautiful conversation. Hello to Anna and the puppies. They behaved really, really well.
they did pretty good. They've been working on before, so this was pretty good.
I hope you have a great season, and thanks again for joining us.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Perfect. Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish podcast brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast, where you'll find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. You can also browse other episodes and subscribe.